Man throws his dog into the river, but when he turns around, he can't believe his eyes. On the banks of the Hudson River, where gentle waters slid between ancient rocks, James gazed at the horizon with weary eyes. At 42, his face bore the marks of a life full of hard choices and abandoned dreams. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the dusty ground, while the wind whispered among the leaves of the century-old trees lining the water's edge. Beside him, Buddy, a mixed breed with caramel-colored fur and warm honey eyes, wagged, his tail faithfully, oblivious to the storm forming in his owner's heart. The dog was his only true companion, amid the solitude that consumed him day after day. The constant criticisms from his family about his attachment to the animal echoed in his mind, blending with the sound of the ever-flowing river. That afternoon, something different hung in the air. A dense, mysterious energy enveloped both man and dog. As dark clouds gathered overhead, the river, a silent witness to so many stories, seemed to sense that it was about to become the stage for a moment that would forever change James's life. James carried within him a burning desire for freedom, a feeling intertwined with a deep need for human connection. In his lonely routine, only Buddy offered the unconditional affection he so craved. The dog, with unwavering loyalty, had become more than just a pet. He was his silent confidant, never judging his choices or condemning his failures. In the small house by the river where he had lived for 5 years, the walls still echoed with the sounds of family quarrels and endless demands. His brothers couldn't understand how an adult man could devote so much time and affection to a simple mutt, while his mother insisted that he needed to get his act together and start a family. But for James, Buddy meant far more than mere company. He embodied the acceptance he had never found anywhere else. On cold mornings, when they walked together along the riverbank, the dog followed him with a devotion that made his heart ache. In moments of despair, when bills piled up and work was scarce, it was Buddy's honey eyes that kept him going, reminding him that there was still beauty in the world. Amid the shadows of the trees and the murmuring waters, man and dog had built their own universe of mutual understanding. Yet the external pressures grew day by day, threatening to shatter the fragile balance they had found. The freedom James so desperately sought seemed increasingly distant, while the weight of others' expectations slowly suffocated him. In the heart of that gloomy afternoon, James's dilemma reached its peak when his older sister, Rebecca, unexpectedly appeared at his home. The heavy air and palpable tension between them were unmistakable, while Buddy, sensing the charged atmosphere, cowered in a corner of the modest living room. Rebecca, ever the critic, launched into yet another tirade about how James was wasting his life. Her cutting words echoed through the house. "You need to stop this obsession with that dog. Mom is sick with worry watching you throw your life away because of a mutt." James's face contorted in an expression of pain and suppressed anger. Each of Rebecca's words struck him like a knife, each one deeper than the last. The sound of the river in the background seemed to grow louder, as if amplifying the turmoil within him. The argument escalated when Rebecca mentioned a job opportunity in New York City, a real chance for change, but one that required James to move to the capital. "You can't take that dog into an apartment? It's time to grow up and be responsible," she shouted, gesticulating emphatically. Buddy, sensing the commotion, approached James and rested his snout on his hand, as he always did in tough moments. But this time, the comforting gesture only intensified the inner conflict that raged within him. Years of family criticism mixed with his own doubts and fears, the burden of familial expectations, compounded by financial pressure and a crushing sense of failure, formed a storm in his mind. The walls of his small house seemed to close in on him, while the sound of the river called out like an ancient, mysterious voice, promising a solution to his problems. In the kitchen, the argument reached its breaking point when Rebecca grabbed the framed photo of James with Buddy that hung on the refrigerator. "This isn't the life of a grown person. You need to wake up to reality," she yelled, slamming the frame onto the table. The shattering of glass was like a snap in James's consciousness. Something inside him broke at that moment. His eyes, once brimming with sorrow, now reflected a grim determination. The river continued its relentless call, its dark waters promising a liberation that he had longed for so desperately. While Rebecca's sermon droned on, James stared out the window at the churning waters of the Hudson. An idea began to form in his troubled mind, a drastic solution that might finally silence the voices tormenting him. The wind picked up, causing the old trees to groan, as if nature itself sensed the decision about to be made. In the backyard, Buddy played, oblivious to the storm in his master's heart. The dog, in his innocence, could not fathom that his world was about to be turned upside down. The dark clouds gathering overhead seemed to foretell the tragedy to come, as the river whispered promises of a freedom that would cost far more than James could ever imagine. The sound of Buddy's body hitting the water cut through the air like a silent scream. The murky waters of the Hudson quickly swallowed him, dragging him away in the relentless current. James stood frozen, a mixture of horror and a strange sense of release coursing through him. But then something changed. When he finally turned around, his heart froze. What he saw defied reason. Something utterly unexpected was happening in the river, a phenomenon that challenged all logic and rational understanding. Reality shattered before his eyes, unveiling a mystery that would transform that dark afternoon by the Hudson forever. The white sound of Buddy's body striking the water reverberated like a silent cry. The murky Hudson swallowed him up swiftly, pulling him along its violent current. James remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the spot where the dog had vanished, feeling a mix of horror and an inexplicable sense of liberation that paralyzed him. The current danced furiously, creating eddies that seemed to hide ancient secrets. The wind howled through the trees as if nature itself were protesting against such cruelty. James felt the weight of his action, a guilt that slowly consumed him, turning every second into an agonizing eternity. Then, something inexplicable began to occur. At the very moment James was about to turn away, the flow of the water changed. A strange, almost supernatural glow began to emerge from the river. It wasn't the reflection of the sun, nor a normal movement in the current. It was something that completely defied human understanding. James's eyes widened, and his breath caught. What he was seeing could not be real. The waters seemed to come alive, forming shapes and motions that defied natural law. But he was not merely struggling against the current. Something far deeper and more mysterious was at work. A peculiar energy pulsed in the air, making the hairs on James's neck stand on end. The surrounding sounds seemed distant, muffled by an almost musical vibration emanating from the river. It was as if the very environment were reacting to the scene, bearing witness to a moment that transcended ordinary reality. At the center of that liquid chaos, something began to form. It wasn't Buddy as James had always known him, but something that defied all understanding, a transformation in progress, revealing a mystery he could never have imagined. James felt his world crumble, every certainty he had built up shattered before his eyes, as the scene in front of him challenged him to comprehend something far beyond his limited perception of reality. When he finally looked back, his body trembled. What he saw could not be explained by human reason. It was something so extraordinary, so beyond logic, that his legs gave way, and he sensed that his understanding of the world would change forever. The river continued its relentless flow, guarding the secret of that unique moment, and James, completely stunned, awaited the revelation that was about to change everything. The sound of the river grew more intense with every step James took along its banks. Desperation began to consume him, turning each movement into an erratic dance of guilt and regret. His feet, once steady on the dusty ground, now slipped on the smooth, moss-covered stones. The Hudson's waters seemed to toy with his suffering, at times concealing Buddy in their murky depths, at others briefly revealing the caramel fur of the dog battling the current. Every movement by Buddy was a blow to James's heart, a silent reminder of the betrayal he had just committed. The river appeared to come alive at that moment. Its once serene waters transformed into a mosaic of unpredictable motions. Small whirlpools formed, as if nature herself were weaving a commentary on the dramatic scene unfolding. Now running, muscles tense and breath ragged, James's eyes darted. Between the turbulent water and the uneven path along the bank, the crunch of breaking branches beneath his feet blended with the roar of the current, creating a chaotic symphony of despair and motion. The vegetation around him seemed to conspire against him. Thorny bushes tugged at his clothes. Ancient roots threatened to trip him, as if the very landscape wished to punish him for his rash act. Sweat mingled with tears he scarcely noticed falling. James's thoughts were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Memories of happier times with Buddy flashed through his troubled mind. The dog who had been his sole true companion during lonely moments, who had silently observed his pain without judgment. The honey eyes of the animal still seemed fixed on him, transcending time and space with a loyalty that silently condemned him. His internal struggle was a storm of contradictory emotions. The suffocating pressure from family, the stifling expectations and unfulfilled dreams all converged in that critical moment. Throwing Buddy into the river wasn't merely an act of despair. It was a silent scream against a world that had made him feel small and insignificant. The weight of years of solitude and rejection pressed on him, seeping into every pore and every breath. His hands, which had thrown the dog mere moments before, now trembled uncontrollably. The river's current seemed to mirror the turbulence within him, calm one moment, violent the next, as unpredictable as his own thoughts. Flashes of happy memories with Buddy struck him like lightning in his disturbed mind. The dog who had comforted him on lonely nights, who had metaphorically embraced him during his darkest hours, now fought for his survival, a silent verdict against his cruelty. The burden of a lifetime of isolation and rejection condensed into that single moment. James now understood that his act went far beyond abandoning a pet. It was an act of self-destruction, a desperate gesture by someone who had lost touch with himself. His soul oscillated between profound remorse and a strange sensation of liberation. The river carried on, not only with Buddy, but with the shattered fragments of his own identity. Every meter the current traveled felt like a judgment, a verdict on his most intimate choices. Inside, James was undergoing a profound transformation. The man who had thrown Buddy into the river was no longer the same man watching the dog fight for survival. A part of him was dying with every movement of the struggling animal, while another, part fragile, vulnerable, yet deeply aware, was being born. The sounds around him amplified his inner pain. The wind rustling through the trees, the roar of the water, and the distant cries of birds all seemed to conspire to heighten his anguish. James was submerged in a universe of guilt, where every thought was a sentence and every breath a silent lament. The tension along the Hudson reached its zenith, transforming the scene into an arena of despair and survival. The smooth, slippery stones challenged him in his frantic run, each step a battle against the guilt that made him falter physically and emotionally. The current seemed almost sentient, forming whirlpools that cruelly alternated between concealing and revealing Buddy. The dog fought with a determination that transcended mere animal survival, his movements at times precise, at times desperate, crafting a narrative of resistance that directly confronted his owner's betrayal. The river became a metaphorical stage for redemption. The sounds of snapping branches, roaring water, and James's labored breathing created a chaotic symphony that mirrored his inner torment. The surrounding vegetation appeared to conspire against him, thorny shrubs tugging at his clothes, ancient roots trying to trip him, as if nature itself sought to punish him for his rash deed. Memories of joyful times with Buddy flashed disturbingly in his mind. Each recollection was a blow to his conscience, revealing the depth of the bond now violently tested. The dog's gaze, fixed on James, carried a loyalty that transcended physical distance, piercing his tormented soul. From afar, Mrs. Helen observed the scene as if she held a secret beyond James's understanding. Her aged eyes tracked every movement of the river, as if she could read invisible stories in its turbulent waters. A slight, enigmatic smile played on her wrinkled lips. Time itself seemed to dilate in that moment. Seconds stretched into eternities, each movement by Buddy a sentence, each silent cry from James a profound confession. The landscape appeared frozen, as if the universe were suspended, awaiting an outcome that defied human understanding. The struggle between Buddy and the current reached its apex. Despite battling the furious waters, the dog maintained a strength that defied nature itself. His resistance was more than physical. It was a silent declaration of love and forgiveness that directly challenged the cruelty of abandonment. In that tragic moment, James realized his greatest battle was not against the river or even Buddy, but against himself. Each staggering step, every silent tear, and every labored breath was part of a redemption journey that had only just begun. One that would force him to confront the deepest recesses of his soul. The tension escalated. turning that moment into an existential crossroads where love, betrayal, regret, and hope danced an unpredictable choreography, preparing the ground for something utterly unforeseen. Buddy, still struggling against the current, began swimming toward a small island near the Hudson, where other animals had sought shelter. His movements, once desperate, took on an almost supernatural precision, as if an invisible force guided him through the turbulent waters. The island, partially covered in dense vegetation and ancient rocks, emerged from the water like a secret sanctuary. A motley group of creatures, a scattering of rats, injured birds, and other abandoned dogs, watched Buddy's arrival with a mix of curiosity and expectation. Something extraordinary was happening there. It wasn't merely a refuge, but a territory where survival transcended natural limits. The animals gathered there seemed to share a connection beyond human logic, an ancient energy pulsing beneath the surface of ordinary reality. When Buddy finally reached the island's shore, his movements revealed a subtle transformation. His eyes, once simply honey-colored, now held an ancient wisdom, a knowledge that surpassed that of a mere dog. He was no longer just an abandoned mutt. He had become a being endowed with an intelligence and purpose that defied any rational explanation. The other animals welcomed him not as a newcomer, but as someone long expected. A silent ritual of acknowledgement took place, where each creature communicated in an invisible language understood only among them. Buddy strode among them with a confidence suggesting that this was not his first visit. On the opposite bank, James watched the scene with a mixture of horror and fascination. The island, once a jumble of rocks and foliage, now pulsed with an almost mystical energy. The animals moved in a synchrony reminiscent of an ancient dance, and at the center of it all stood Buddy, transformed. The fading light of the afternoon created strange reflections on the water, rendering the island alternately clear and utterly surreal. James blinked, questioning his own perception. Was this real or merely a hallucination born from guilt and despair? Buddy, now fully integrated with the group, briefly turned his gaze toward James. It wasn't a look of accusation or bitterness, but something far deeper, a comprehension that transcended any human feeling of betrayal or forgiveness. At that moment, James realized that his act of throwing Buddy into the river was not the end, but perhaps the beginning of a journey he could never fully comprehend. The island and its inhabitants harbored secrets that defied all rationality, suggesting that there exists a world beyond what our eyes can see. Buddy's transformation was more than physical. It was a metamorphosis hinting at intertwined destinies, connections that surpassed human understanding, and the possibility of redemption in the most unlikely places. Desperation surged in James with every passing second. His bare feet slid on the smooth, moss-covered stones along the riverbank, his sweat-soaked clothes merging with the slippery mud. The current seemed to come alive with every step, challenging him as Buddy continued to battle the turbulent waters. His eyes darted frantically between the churning river and the possible path of the dog. His heart pounded furiously, a mix of guilt, fear, and an inexplicable urgency to rescue the very animal he had so recently forsaken. The sound of snapping branches beneath his feet merged with the roar of the water, composing a chaotic score of sheer tension. The landscape conspired against him. Thorny shrubs caught his clothes, ancient roots threatened to trip him, as if nature itself sought to penalize his rash act. Sweat and tears mingled on his face, revealing the inner battle he waged. The determination to rescue Buddy overcame any fear or physical limitation. James knew he had to enter the river, regardless of what might happen. Every memory of his time with the dog, those moments of loneliness and the unconditional companionship that had sustained him, propelled him forward. It was as if his own redemption was bound to saving Buddy. Without a second thought, James plunged into the icy waters of the Hudson. The impact was brutal, the current engulfing him completely, testing every muscle and reserve of strength he possessed. This was no longer merely a rescue, it was a declaration of love, a desperate attempt to undo his most grievous mistake. The water enveloped him, cold and relentless. His strokes were driven by an energy that went beyond reason. It was raw emotion, pure remorse transformed into action. Every pull brought him closer not only to Buddy but to his own redemption. The river seemed to test him, at times pushing him back, at others allowing him to move forward a few more desperate meters. From the bank, Mrs. Helen watched with an enigmatic smile. Her time-worn eyes seemed to hold a secret beyond James's comprehension. The elderly woman remained still, a silent beacon guiding this unlikely journey of atonement. With every stroke, James felt that something extraordinary was about to occur. He wasn't sure what, but a different energy pulsed in the air, a sense that his fate and Buddy's were about to become intertwined in ways he could never have imagined. At that critical moment, the Hudson seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Consumed by despair, James pressed on against the current with a determination that defied human reason. Every movement was a silent plea, every stroke a declaration of love and remorse. His muscles burned as he battled the turbulent water that sought to engulf him. His eyes, fixed ahead, searched desperately for the familiar caramel fur of Buddy, dancing like a fleeting ghost among the waves. The gulf between man and dog was more than physical. It was an abyss of guilt and redemption. The river's fury intensified, as if it understood the human drama unfolding within its depths. Whirlpools formed, creating nearly insurmountable obstacles. But in that moment, James knew no limits. His resolve was stronger than any force of nature, deeper than any fear. Suddenly, a flash of caramel fur appeared amid the roiling waters. Buddy fought with superhuman strength, not as a victim but as a warrior. His eyes, ever loyal, now shone with an intensity that transcended ordinary animal instinct. It was as though an invisible connection guided him, a force that went beyond mere survival. James felt something extraordinary. This was no longer just about rescuing his dog. It was about rescuing himself. Each stroke brought him closer not only to Buddy but to his own salvation. The once menacing river now seemed to cooperate with his journey, forming passages that defied logic. At the moment when his hands finally grasped Buddy's fur, something magical occurred. A strange radiance enveloped them both, as if an ancient energy had embraced them. For an instant, the river appeared to freeze in time, suspending reality, creating a portal between the mundane and the mystical. Buddy showed no sign of fear. His eyes, those same honey eyes, now sparkled with a wisdom that defied rational explanation. He was no longer merely a dog being rescued. He had become a being carrying secrets beyond human comprehension. When they finally reached the bank, James and Buddy emerged transformed. They were no longer just a man and his dog, but two souls who had traversed a portal of redemption. The landscape around them seemed different, as if the very universe had been recalibrated by their confrontation. Mrs. Helen watched from afar and smiled knowingly. Her ancient eyes recognized the sacred moment of transformation. The Hudson, a silent witness, continued its eternal flow, guarding the secret of that unlikely journey of love and forgiveness. What James witnessed defied all logic. Something extraordinary had occurred in those turbulent waters, a redemption that went far beyond a simple rescue. In the frenzy of their emergence from the water, James's despair transformed into frantic energy. Buddy, completely soaked, shook off droplets that sparkled in the last rays of the afternoon light. Both bodies, exhausted, trembled not only from physical fatigue, but from the emotional intensity of the rescue. James embraced Buddy with a strength that conveyed so much more than remorse. It was as if he were trying to recover not only the dog, but fragments of himself that he had lost over the years. Tears mixed with the river's water, mapping a liquid landscape of deep, unspoken emotions. Surprisingly, Buddy looked at James with a wisdom that transcended human understanding. His honey eyes seemed to contain ancient stories, secrets no words could ever express. There was no anger, no resentment, only a profound understanding that went beyond the act of abandoning or rescuing. The riverbank appeared changed. The smooth stones, once dangerous obstacles, now stood as silent witnesses to transformation. The moist moss, which had once caused James to slip, now offered a maternal support, as if nature itself were embracing them after the ordeal. Mrs. Helen, still watching from a distance, smiled with a knowledge that escaped James. Her aged eyes absorbed every detail of that redemptive moment, as though she were witnessing something far greater than a mere rescue. The sound of the river grew gentler, almost musical now. The waters that had once roared with fury now flowed with an almost unreal tranquility. as if the river itself celebrated this reconnection and the restoration of love. Gradually, James's breathing normalized. Each inhalation carried the damp scent of Buddy, a mixture of earth, water, and an essence of loyalty that no betrayal could ever shatter. His muscles, once taut with adrenaline, began to relax. Buddy, for his part, remained close to James, not as a frightened animal, but as a guardian. His body shuddered slightly, not from fear, but from an energy that vibrated between them, a connection that went far beyond the ordinary bond between man and dog. The fading light painted golden reflections on the water, coloring the scene with hues of hope and renewal. James realized that this moment was far more than a physical rescue. It was a journey of redemption, a rebirth of his own humanity. The surrounding sounds, the whisper of leaves, the distant song of birds, the steady flow of the river wove together a symphony of healing. Every element of nature seemed to conspire in favor of this reconnection, as if the entire universe were bearing witness to their transformation. When they finally rose, James and Buddy were not the same. Something profound had changed, a renewed connection, a love that had survived even the most destructive impulse. The Hudson continued its eternal course, holding the secret of that unlikely story of redemption. In the aftermath, what James experienced defied logic. An extraordinary event had unfolded in those turbulent waters, a redemption that transcended a mere rescue. The aftermath of James's desperate act turned into a frantic energy as he emerged from the river. Buddy, completely drenched, shook, off droplets sparkling in the dying light. Their exhausted bodies trembled not only from physical strain, but from the overwhelming emotions of their ordeal. James clutched Buddy in a tight embrace that revealed far more than regret. It was as if he were reclaiming not just the dog, but pieces of himself lost over the years. Tears mingled with river water, drawing a liquid map of deep, unspoken feelings. Buddy, remarkably calm, gazed at James with a wisdom that defied human explanation. His honey eyes held ancient tales and secrets no words could capture. No anger, no bitterness, only a profound understanding that went beyond the act of abandonment or rescue. The bank itself felt transformed. The smooth stones, once obstacles to overcome, now stood as silent witnesses to their metamorphosis. The moist moss, which had caused James to stumble earlier, now offered a comforting support, as if nature itself were welcoming them after their trial. From afar, Mrs. Helen continued to watch with an enigmatic smile. Her aged eyes took in every detail of this redemptive moment, as though witnessing something far greater than a simple rescue. The once thundering sound of the river softened into a nearly musical murmur. The waters, which had raged with fury, now flowed with an almost surreal calm, as if celebrating the reconnection and renewed love. Gradually, James's breathing slowed. Every breath carried the damp scent of Buddy, a mix of earth, water, and a loyalty that no betrayal could ever break. His tense muscles began to relax as the storm inside him subsided. Buddy stayed by his side, not as a frightened pet, but as a guardian. His body shuddered slightly, not from fear, but from an inner energy that connected them in a way that transcended ordinary understanding. As the late afternoon light created golden reflections on the water, the scene took on hues of hope and renewal. James understood that what had transpired was more than a physical rescue. It was a journey of redemption and the rebirth of his own humanity. The natural sounds, the whisper of the leaves, the distant call of birds, the steady flow of the river, wove together in a symphony of healing. Every element of nature seemed to conspire in favor of their transformation, as though the entire universe witnessed this moment of reconnection. When they finally left the water, James and Buddy were no longer the same. Something profound had changed. A renewed bond, a love that had endured even the darkest act. The Hudson continued its eternal flow, keeping secret the miracle of that improbable journey of love and forgiveness. In the days that followed, the dramatic return of James, with Buddy, transformed his entire family dynamic. At a Sunday lunch at his mother's house the following week, the air was different. Where once there had been judgment, now there was silent admiration. James's mother, once tormented by his loneliness, looked on with renewed tenderness as she observed the bond between man and dog. Buddy moved through the room with a tranquility that radiated peace. No longer seen as a mere tolerated pet, he was embraced as a genuine member of the family. The relatives, once distant, now caressed him, acknowledging his vital role in James's life. Conversations took on new tones. Instead of pressuring him about marriage or career, stories of overcoming adversity emerged. James, once quiet and introspective, began to share parts of his life that had long been hidden. His transformation touched everyone. It was almost mystical. Something in James's eyes had changed, a spark of hope and resilience that infected all who encountered him. And Buddy, always by his side, seemed to be the catalyst for this familial metamorphosis. Sunday gatherings, once tense and silent, became moments of connection. The family discovered that love can arise from the most unexpected places, often through bonds that transcend human logic. The small house by the Hudson, once a symbol of isolation, turned into a gathering place. Relatives began visiting James more frequently, drawn not only to him, but also by the special energy that Buddy brought. The social expectations that had once imprisoned them were gradually replaced by a deeper understanding of what truly mattered: connection, forgiveness, and unconditional love. James no longer felt compelled to prove his worth by external standards. He had found strength within himself. The story of James and Buddy grew into something of a local legend. Mrs. Helen, the wise woman who had witnessed the rescue, would occasionally speak of the miracle of the river, nurturing a narrative of hope that transcended the event itself. In James's eyes now resided a peace that no material achievement could ever provide. He discovered that his true strength was not measured by societal expectations, but by embracing his vulnerability and reconnecting with what truly mattered. And Buddy, more than just a dog, became the living mirror of unconditional loyalty that defied all convention. This story transcends a personal drama. It is a universal call to reflect on love, redemption, and the true connections that bind us. The Hudson, a silent witness to so many tales, now held the secret of a transformation that went far beyond a simple rescue. The narrative invites every listener to look beyond appearances, to recognize that redemption can emerge in the most unexpected moments. There is no mistake so deep that it cannot be redeemed by the power of true love, whether between humans or between a man and his pet. James discovered that his real strength lay not in meeting society's expectations, but in accepting his vulnerability and reconnecting with what was most important. Buddy, far more than a simple dog, became a testament to a loyalty that challenges every convention. Share this story. Let it resonate in your life. Allow love, in its purest and most unexpected form, to transform you. Because sometimes redemption comes from places you'd never imagine. Mark it, share it, comment on it. Your own story of overcoming deserves to be told.